Good morning, everyone. And I took the weekend off, so I was able to unplug from emails and social media. So thanks for bearing with me. I missed a couple of days of going live, but it was really interesting. I really wanted to speak today regarding CGMs and the pros and cons of whether you should wear them if you're an individual with diabetes or someone without diabetes. I think we understand inherently that understanding what your blood sugars are doing on a regular basis, if you're dealing with type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, gestational diabetes, or type 1.5 diabetes. I think we understand we want to see what your blood sugars are doing so we can better manage those. So I'm going to focus more primarily on should you wear a CGM if you do not have diabetes and why it can be helpful and sometimes why it's not. And I think it's really about the context of education and understanding what you're actually doing. And I'll also share my experience of wearing one as someone who doesn't have diabetes. But I have a few notes here I wanted to share with you because I had this conversation a little bit with Rip Esselstyn when we had our live last Friday, and then Rich Roll's recent interview that I think came out either yesterday or today with a young man who has type 1 diabetes from Australia, and they spoke to a little bit of the CGM and their thoughts around it. So I'm going to come from an individual and also as a physician, and why and how I think CGMs can be helpful and where they shouldn't be used and could be more of a con, let's say. So again, we understand that CGMs are primarily made for diabetes, those with diabetes, to help manage the blood sugar levels, right? But it has also been used recently for athletic performance, weight management, and just a variety of things. There's different companies that will prescribe or give you a glucose monitor with maybe an AI driven app to help you make different food choices. With my understanding is to have a focus of that lowest blood sugar as possible at all times. I don't think that's a healthy approach, and I think it leaves people scared and confused and anxious over things that they shouldn't be. But it also might lead to early detection, but we'll get to that in a minute. But so for the pros, I think it's fairly evident that we'd have some nutritional insight, right? You can really see in real time how different foods and meals impact your blood glucose levels. And this can maybe help you and make you inform dietary choices. So for me, for example, when I first wore a CGM, I was surprised at maybe how, more processed foods, even if they're quote unquote healthy, like, rolled oats versus steel cut oats, what happened in someone who doesn't deal with diabetes, maybe a 30 or 40 point difference in glucose response. So that it was a really interesting note per se. So maybe I would make a different choice. And again, it's all in light of understanding what the fluctuations mean for you and not demonizing, especially plant foods that have glucose or carbohydrates, but really just understanding why and how that happens and making maybe different choices. Again, another one would be, and more recently, I had just wanted to see what a vegan Cinnabon did. Of course, we know there's going to be vegan butter probably and sugar in there, but I was curious as someone whose my A1C was 5.0 recently, has relatively excellent blood sugar levels, control. There's nothing like concerning going on, how high it would go. And I mean, it happened to the 191. And so I was really like, wow. So even on those occasional where I might want to have one, and there's nothing wrong with occasionally going out and doing that if you want to. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't add to how I feel. There was no benefit to it. But if maybe someday I want a vegan birthday cake piece, if someone's celebrating, I can do that. But I also understand in the context of some other things, which I'll get to in a minute, stress and sleep, how that was also impacted, timing of eating, what happens to blood sugars overnight. So, but for me, looking at that data, I see what that processed food would do. I probably will be less inclined to eat it, which in the long scheme of things is actually a healthier choice, right? Because I know I can eat a banana. It'll also go up, but I also know it's a banana. It's very healthy and it's okay for it to go up and back down, right? So, I'm looking at making healthier food choices. So there's a balance here. I can talk about that a little bit longer at length at some other time, but I just really want to show you that you obviously are going to have nutritional insight, the composition of foods, processed foods versus whole foods, and different things that occur. You can optimize your performance. So athletes use CGMs to monitor glucose levels, especially during like endurance events. A good example for myself, and I'm not by any means an elite athlete, far from it, but I am training for a half marathon, and I will tell you, having the CGM on has really benefited me in the sense because I'm, doing my longer runs. I ran 10 miles yesterday, but last weekend, so the last 3 weekends ago, I ran 8, felt pretty good. The next weekend I ran 9, and I typically run in the morning on a fasted state. I'll drink some, water or tea or something, but I don't really feel well because I get GI upset if I run too much having eaten something. But I knew as I was getting into longer distance, I'd probably need to start considering how to, eat before a race, maybe even mid-race if I need to, because I'm a little bit slower. I'm working on getting faster. So my times, I'm running at a longer period of time, hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours. And now we're going to be getting into places that I probably need to have some type of nutrition on board other than fasting all night. And what was interesting was if you looked at my CGM data after running last weekend for 9 miles, it was pretty good. And then it started tapering down as I hit into 8 and 9 miles. And then when I was done, and I felt okay, but I didn't feel the greatest, my blood sugar was 64. And you can see this just trend down and just kind of settle down in that lower range. I was like, okay, so for yesterday or 2 days ago when I ran 10 miles, like I'm going to have half a banana, a good half hour before. I feel like that was a safe time, and see how my run is different. So I'll be running a mile longer and see what my blood sugar does. And, the banana, it spiked a little bit and it came back down into the normal range. And then I started running, and you'll see as you exercise, the running, blood sugars will make your running the running will make your blood sugars come up a little bit. And it stayed nice. It stayed in the nice, I think it was 120s for the majority of my run, especially towards the end, because there's a lot of hills in this run. And I felt much better. I feel like I should have hydrated more. But again, it was a really good experiment, one on how my GI system would be affected by certain foods, how my blood sugar is, and then keeps me from bonking. If you've ever bonked in a run, that is not a good feeling. And the last thing I want to happen is because I didn't, feed myself well. But I also know it's a balance between me and the GI system. Having dealt with that before on a marathon, not fun. So anyway, so there can be some optimizing performance for elite athletes and then recreational runners like myself and other people. So just some ideas there. I think weight management, it can also be helpful because it'll make some dietary adjustments, right? So I don't think in and of itself, keeping lower blood sugars is going to cause you to lose weight. But what it will do is looking at certain foods and noting typically the more rich foods, right? These processed bagels, Cinnabons, and different things, ice creams and sodas, you will see what's happening in real time to your blood sugars. And maybe that'll encourage someone to make different dietary choices into a healthier space, right? Some more fiber-rich whole foods. And I've certainly seen that. I've seen patients make dramatic behavior changes and they actually stick, right? So as a physician who's going over this data with my patients on a regular basis, I share my screen because I can see their data 24/7. Or someone, will tag me, is like, hey, I just ate this. Is this okay? I can go log on and we can, converse via messaging or texting. It has dramatic impact on someone's ability to make different choices because it's their body. This is an objective response by their body in that time, dealing with whatever's been going on, stress, lack of sleep, activity, food choices, all those different things. That person can understand in the context of that moment what's going on and how different food choices can affect them. And the other beautiful thing about the CGM use there is that you can take notes. So I encourage patients to use the app and make notes of the foods they were eating, how much sleep, what was their exercise, what was their blood pressure, what's going on in the context of the blood sugars as we're seeing these elevations and declines. Of course, if they're on medications, what medications they're taking. So again, this very, very important information, but we're discussing it, right? So there's this coming from a medical perspective and educating my patients so they understand what's going on with their blood sugars in the context of the moment at that point in their lives. And so that's very, very beneficial. And this also gets to better understanding of the body's response, which I just basically said, but it really focuses on stress and sleep and exercise and other factors that might affect your glucose levels. So for me, which, I've been a light sleeper for a long time, just to share with you my own experience coming from someone who doesn't have diabetes. I think I might have mentioned this on a previous live, was that I had watched this movie about World War II late, and it had been 3 hours since my last, it was a whole food plant-based meal. I went to sleep. My blood sugar was, below 100. I didn't think much about it. I woke up in the middle of the night from a pretty stressful dream about World War II. I tend to have a bit of an active imagination. And I looked at my CGM data the next morning, and what was interesting is it climbed up to 120, which you'll see when you eat something, but I've never seen it on myself in a fasted state. And then it precipitously dropped. And that was the most bizarre thing. And for me, the only thing I could relate it to was the stress of watching this World War II movie. So, and it obviously affected my sleep because I didn't, I woke up and I was a little like, whoa. And I wear a Whoop as well, and you can see your heart rate going up. And so maybe I need to think about other things that I'm doing outside of the food that I'm intaking. What am I listening to? What am I focusing on? What am I, feeding into my brain in the sense of entertainment? Is it really worth my lack of sleep, which will affect my next day, and yada, yada, yada. So again, this really woke me up to understanding what stress does, lack of sleep, because it woke me up. And yeah, so it's making me make more mindful choices for my long-term health, because I'm always going to be thinking, do I really want to do this? I understand it affects, not only my glucose, but my stress and my sleep. So anyway, so I think there's some very interesting things there. And of course, there's the potential for early detection of diabetes. So maybe someone didn't realize that they were pre-diabetic or insulin resistant, and then we see these blood sugar spikes. This is wonderful time. Early detection is fantastic. So we can make better choices and do some education regarding how certain food choices, lifestyle choices, and certain lifestyle interventions, a different prescription for your life in the sense of eating a whole food plant-based diet, exercise, sleep, stress management, community, all these things can affect your blood sugar levels. And if we get someone early, maybe we can have that nice behavioral change just because they're understanding what their body is going through. And again, it just speaks to that feedback loop. So here are some of the cons. And, I really want to be mindful of the cons as well and fully explain. And at the end, where I feel like it's a beneficial thing or not based on the person and in the context of where they're wearing it. So cons, it's cost. They can be very expensive. The Freestyle Libre, tends to be a little bit cheaper. But the Dexcom can be quite expensive. The Dexcom, and even in my diabetics, if they are non-insulin dependent, it's hard to get a CGM covered by insurance. So I have patients who maybe are on oral medications that might drop their blood sugars. They're still many times not covered. So that's the unfortunate piece there. It can be over monitoring. Sometimes individuals get really anxious. So if you're severely anxious about it, and people can just go bonkers about it and just overwhelming, like it's like check 30 times in less than 5 minutes, right? What I do see if individuals who are with that and I'm working with them, reassurance is really important. But over time, we see that behavior kind of drift off, right? And they're still wearing it, but just learning and the excitement and the novelty of it in the beginning is like anything, shiny new object syndrome. But some people, it really will feed into their anxiety. And that's where, for me, as a physician who's prescribing this, I feel very responsible to take the time to educate and answer all the questions or concerns and, help them understand why it's important to look at the CGM data in the context of where they are in that moment and if this is something to be concerned about or not. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity for them to, one, learn about their body, but also understand that they can make different choices to make them feel better. Maybe you could also see maybe the anxiety can cause, maybe they had an argument or stress or panic attack, you might see blood sugar rise. That's a great opportunity to discuss what other hormones are doing in the body and what stress is doing to the body, and what, let's check your blood pressure, what's going on, all these different things. How's your sleep? It's a conversation starter. So, but the over-monitoring can be an issue for someone who's anxiety ridden, and maybe it wouldn't be a good choice for someone like that. Some people also have some skin irritation. I'd say maybe the hundreds of patients that I've had on CGMs, less than 1%, but it can be an irritation issue, especially if you had some adhesive issues with like Band-Aids and such. There is also some concerns regarding accuracy. I feel like the Freestyle tends to be less accurate than the Dexcom. So if I do have someone on insulin, and it also will depend on their insurance, I will try to get the Dexcom. It's a little bit more cumbersome because there's two components versus just one. And but if someone's making insulin decisions, especially like my type 1 diabetics, who it's like every meal, for example, type 2, sometimes you just need a small amount of long-acting insulin, or maybe just a smaller dose with your meals, because typically they're still producing insulin. That actually might be an issue. So if I have someone who had an aberrant, what's the word, blood sugar, that's where the finger stick comes into play, right? So we're going to remember the CGM is using interstitial fluid, so it's not as accurate as a blood. There might be a little bit of a delay in some people. So again, accuracy issues, especially if you're making insulin decisions, can be a concern. Or it could be, showing lower than it actually is, higher, or higher or lower. So again, if I have someone who's a true diabetic, I will make sure that they have a regular glucose monitor. The other piece to that, I would say, on accuracy, but it's what you'll see is some trends. The trends are really important, and the discussion and education around the trends are really helpful for people. But again, we'll look at that. Most of the time, for example, if you call the company, they'll say anywhere between a 20 and 30 point difference between a finger stick is to be expected. And the nice thing about the Freestyle Libre and the Dexcom, if it falls off early or something, they will send you a new one for free. But again, accuracy can be an issue. And I think this is the biggest one, is the potential for misinterpretation, right? So without, the proper knowledge or guidance, users might misinterpret their data or make unnecessary dietary or lifestyle changes. For example, I had someone who had used a CGM from one of these companies and was already plant-based and was really stressed because she would see her blood sugars go higher than the quote-unquote prescribed elevation that it should, because she would eat a banana, or she would eat a date or an orange or something that was more on the higher glycemic list. And she was really stressed out about it. And she was always trying, she's getting to where she wasn't eating. She was making, higher fat, lower carb choices. And it was just really messing with her mind and life. And so she came to me, and I couldn't tap into that data. So I re-prescribed her a new one. And we discussed what I was seeing, and I reassured her what was a normal response for someone. I was like, we cannot, be looking at these and trying to keep these blood sugars as low as possible. That's, one, not healthy. And two, it's, you're taking context out of what's normal. And you'll see blood sugars go upwards, like even in healthy food choices. Let's say it's not even processed at all, you might see in the 160s, and it will go down into probably low 60s, right? All of these that's a normal, healthy range. I think, what was really interesting is looking at people when they eat, like with intermittent fasting, what happens, or they eating one meal a day, the timing of the day, does it disrupt their sleep? So there can be some really interesting data points regarding when and how you eat, but in the context of just keeping it as low as possible, I don't think that's a good choice. Again, looking at the food, we know foods are less healthy for us, such as a Cinnabon. And, seeing these one-offs, it's not harmful. It's going to be okay. But again, that's where having a discussion with a physician or someone who's educated and understanding the nuances of your blood sugars and taking notes in the context of using the CGM, it's really important. Again, lots to discuss there. And I think it also gives a false sense of security, right? So relying just on CGM data might give you a false sense of security if you're not looking at your overall health, right? So glucose is great, and I mean, it's a really interesting and important thing to measure, especially looking at the population and how many people have diabetes, pre-diabetes that are undiagnosed, and where these could be very helpful in early detection and making different lifestyle choices, which by the end of the day, everyone should be eating a whole food plant-based diet, because that's where you see some remarkable things happening. So, but it can give you a false security, and we should be looking at your overall health and everything that you're doing. And I think the other thing is, just kind of getting back to, we can't overemphasize just one factor, just glucose. What is your blood pressure doing? What is your cholesterol? There's so many other things that we should be looking at outside of glucose. And that's where working with a lifestyle medicine physician who's trained in understanding the whole body, the whole person, right? So they come from, allopathic training. So we understand medications and diseases and the pathology in the human body, but now we understand also where the really important prescription of lifestyle is vital for a long and healthy life and, increasing the health span. So I hope that was helpful. I, gave a few highlights of my own experience. And I just, given the context of the conversation I had on Rips Live and some concerns there people were having, and then listening, and reading up on the rituals. I haven't listened to the whole podcast yet, but just reading up that, there were some questions regarding should those who don't have diabetes be utilizing a CGM. And like I said, at the end of the day, I think it depends, but it should be prescribed by a physician, and there should be follow-up regarding the data. So for me, I don't mind prescribing it to anyone, but there has to be in context with me discussing it with you and looking at that data. So, because the last thing I'd ever want to do is cause harm from someone who's diving in deep into their data and not understanding it and just making some assumptions that are incorrect, and then making different lifestyle choices based on that, which could actually long-term be harmful. Meaning, for example, someone's trying to keep a very low blood sugar and making more of a keto choice type diet. They're going more towards high fat, animal products and low carb, and actually in the long run, making their insulin resistance much worse. So I hope that was helpful. I will just say I will have my glucose mastermind open for one more day. I have a few spots left, and we'll be open another group probably next month or a month after that. But anyway, so if you are someone who has insulin resistance or some concerns about blood sugar, or just want to learn, or if you're diabetic, type 1 or 2, I'm happy to have you join. And that's just go to drmarbus.com, click on Glucose Mastermind. But I will be closing that down by tomorrow, because that's when we meet. And so it's meet twice a month for 3 months. And again, I hope this was helpful. If you would also like, you can sign up for my newsletter. I'm going to be sending this list out, I think, on my next newsletter, describing the value and pros and cons of understanding the pros and cons of use of a CGM. Also, I just should want to mention for the Healing Kitchen, which I do with Brittany Giroudi, we have just launched our premium membership. So we have a base membership and a premium membership. The base is we meet weekly every Wednesday. Brittany cooks for us, sends out recipes for the first half hour, and then I answer all and any medical questions for the last half hour. And that is our basic. And then the premium, which Jonathan, my son, has been working really hard at getting everything set up, is the same. It's the base plus you have a community. Those who are already in the basic will automatically be grandfathered already, so you guys are good. We'll have expert weekly workshops, which this weekend, starting at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 12 p.m. Eastern, we have Vince Roundtree joining us. So please check that out. If you go to the Healing Kitchen, or I think it's we're doing it on weight control for him, but I think if you click up on the website, it'll also talks about the workshop, which you can buy independently if you don't want to become a member of the Healing Kitchen. And I'll also be doing a deep dive workshop every single month, only for the Healing Kitchen community, and creating an ebook based on the workshop. So you'll have that and have all the recordings at the back, and you'll have all the recipes. And also, when I bring on a guest to the podcast, I will let you guys know, and you guys share with me what questions you'd like me to ask. And we'll have the public facing part of the podcast, and then we'll have the last few minutes of the interview all about questions from the Healing Kitchen, and only they will have access to those answers. So I think that's everything. It's a lot. So we're trying to provide a ton of value, really help people get educated on their health in a really warm and loving place. If you don't want to spend any money, check out the Dr. Marbus free Facebook group. I think we're closing in on 900 or so members. It's a great group. I'm in there a lot. I post a lot. I'll post this list I have here for you. But yeah, so check it out, guys. Again, lots of nuanced things around the CGM. I hope that was helpful. But have a wonderful, blessed day, and I will see you tomorrow.